Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Star Wars with Universe Sandbox 2. In today's video we're going to be talking about a system called Tython. This is the system that's probably one of the more important systems in terms of history of Star Wars and history of Jedi Order, and specifically there's a planet called Tython on it that we're going to be discussing in more detail. But before we start, let's just see where this system is located in comparison to everything else. So we have our Hoth right there, Naboo is here, Tatooine is in this region, Kashyyyk is right here, Coruscant, the central black hole, and between the black hole and Coruscant there is a little system called Tython. Now, interestingly, on most maps related to Star Wars, you'll notice that there's actually no galactic pathways going to this particular star, and that's because officially the way to this star has actually been lost, because it actually does play an important role in Star Wars universe. Many times did Jedi Order and or Sith actually try to make this planet secret, and at the same time it's actually kind of difficult to find because there's so many other stars in this region that most people, most Jedi and most Sith today, and when I say today I mean in the times of episode 7, The Force Awakens, would not actually be able to locate this particular system anymore. Anyway, so yes, it's a really interesting system, and here there's actually quite a lot of different planets. I'm going to show you how many specifically, and this is what it looks like from the outside, and we're going to be discussing each of these planets and focusing on specifically on Tython at the end of the video. Now, so the star is actually called Tython. It's very similar to the Sun, and around it has 11 different planets, with most of planets being completely colonized or actually habitable. Now, the first one is called Sunspot. This is actually a really interesting planet. I'm going to show you in a second why. As soon as I accelerate time a little bit, you'll notice that this is actually the only planet in the system that has a retrograde, and let me just disable this for a second, retrograde motion in comparison to everything else. So all of the stars have counterclockwise motion and Sunspot has a clockwise motion. For this reason, many early Jedi scientists, if that's a thing, actually went to this planet trying to investigate if it was captured from somewhere else in the universe, and that's probably what happened. It probably just flew by Tython relatively close and got captured into its gravitational field, but is orbiting against the flow. And there's a period right here, and that's somewhere around this time when Sunspot comes very close to the next planet called Montara, and because of this, apparently Montara gets ridiculously high seasonal changes and things like volcanic eruptions and so on and so forth. Basically, Montara suffers every time Sunspot comes close to it, and this of course happens every week or so. So basically, when this occurs, Montara gets crazy volcanic eruptions and a lot of other unfortunate events. But Sunspot itself is actually a really hot world. Basically here, even though there are actually colonies somewhere in the poles that are responsible for mining, because this is actually apparently a mining colony, this is actually a really dangerous world to live on, and has a lot of volcanic eruptions, a lot of volcanic activity, and of course earthquakes. But all of the miners that are on this planet have to basically live in very harsh conditions, wearing environmental suits just to survive on this planet. And apparently 10% of them actually usually die. But the reason this planet is actually very important in Star Wars universe is that the two very important materials that are responsible for fueling the faster than light travel are located on this planet. I'm sure there are actually other planets that have those materials, but this was originally the planet used to produce these materials that are used to power ships' interstellar drives. And the next planet, called Montara, is also a mining colony, and in this game it's particularly beautiful. Look at those shiny effects that we have. So Montara is also a mining colony in Tython system. And even though it's a little bit less hot than Sunspot, it's still pretty hot here, and unfortunately does suffer from those extreme effects every time Sunspot comes close to it. Now, planet number 3 is a little bit different. This planet is called Nox, and this is actually a manufacturing planet. So a lot of the things that are mined on the first 2 planets are then brought here, where they are manufactured. And by the way, all of these planets have habitants on them, and they're actually called Tythons. These were originally from Tython, the planet we'll talk about in more detail in a few minutes. But many of them migrated to these other planets for a reason I'll explain to you in a few minutes as well. Anyway, so this is Nox, and all of the inhabitants were actually living inside domed-like colonies here. So it's super hot here as well, and this planet is actually very, very polluted. And we're gonna actually try to see if we can increase the pollution a little bit by possibly adding a bunch of stuff in the atmosphere here, and not just pretend that this is pollution flying around. And so because of this pollution, this planet is actually used to manufacture some of the more hazardous materials in the Star Wars universe. And basically this planet is already so polluted that they decided they're going to produce more pollutable stuff and pollutable materials on it. The next planet is called Krafkor, or Krafkur if you want to be more French about it. And this is another planet that has very dry, very arid climate, and basically is also very hot. And it's so hot, in fact, that apparently no creature can actually live on the surface of this planet without any kind of protection. But what this planet is famous for is these large blue crystals that apparently are mined here. And it has a lot of inactive volcanoes that you kind of can see on the surface here. But interestingly, it does have breathable atmosphere, which I'm not sure if I added here. And I did add breathable atmosphere, except I added a little bit too much. Let's decrease it a little bit. And what's really, really cool about it is that apparently inside this planet, underneath the surface, there is all of these caverns that are filled with lakes and plants and literally jungles with animals and stuff. Basically, there's a lot of life underneath the surface. And planet number 5 is the most important planet here, and this is Tython. Now, Tython is very similar in its appearance to Earth, and I'm going to show you more of Tython when we play Star Wars The Old Republic at the end. But basically, this is the planet that is the home of the Jedi Order, and we'll talk about this near the end of the video as well, just after I finish exploring everything else in the system. And Tython has 2 moons. One is called Ashla, which is a very bright whitish moon, and one is called Bogan, which is a darker brownish, I guess, color of rust and blood kind of a moon. And these 2 moons are essentially their representation of the light and the dark side of the Force. So originally, historically, when the first Jedi actually came to this particular planet, they noticed that there were 2 moons representing these 2 sides of the Force. And Tython is apparently the strongest planet in terms of the Force. It actually, for some unknown reason, has a very strong affiliation with the Force and has a very kind of a strong richness of the Force. And when they settled on this planet, they realized, so these 2 moons represent 2 sides of the Force, and they've actually used these 2 moons to, well, first of all, they're colonized, and second is that they've used them for different types of meditation. We'll talk more about this later on. So basically, yes, so this is Tython. Now let's keep moving, and this is planet number 5. And planet number 6 is called Kalimar. Now, this planet has 3 moons orbiting around it. We don't really know what the names are, but I just kind of randomly generated these 3 moons. And, oh, this is a really beautiful moon. Look at that. Oh, this is so pretty and pink. Anyway, so Kalimar is actually the home of the non-Force sensitive Tythons, people from this particular solar system. So anyone who was not able to survive on Tython moved to Kalimar, and Kalimar is very similar to Coruscant in a sense, in that it's actually a metropolis. It's a planet that's also a city, and which is why you see all of these lights everywhere. These are city lights. It's a business and also religious center of the system, and it boasts, high density, well-integrated population, and basically it's made out of metal for the most part, and has really, really tall city-like spires everywhere, and is also actually known as the Jewel of Tython system. So it's not really the Tython that's more important, it's actually Kalimar that's the most important planet in this particular system in terms of political power. Tython, on the other hand, is the Force center, not only of this system, but actually possibly even the entire Star Wars universe, or galaxy, that is. And so Tython, the interesting thing about it is that if you're not Force sensitive, you cannot survive on Tython. Apparently, it's so powerful in the Force that anyone who's not Force sensitive would actually most likely perish. The comparison that the Star Wars writers use when they describe this is basically, imagine you're a fish in the water, so you can easily live on Tython if Tython is covered in water. But if you're not a fish and if you don't breathe water, then you will not be able to survive here. Basically, think of the Force as the water, and it's covering the whole Tython. So anyone who's not Force sensitive obviously kind of dies there. And for this reason, non-Force sensitive Tythons, people from the system, move to the other planets and the moons around Tython. So the next planet is called Shakakwa, with 2 A's, with double A in the middle, and it's a pretty interesting name and pretty interesting planet as well. It looks very beautiful from this angle. And this planet is also a planet with breathable atmosphere, and it's actually covered by land masses and lots of oceans, which you see right here. But just like Tatooine, this particular planet that only has 1 moon is actually governed by the criminal overlords. Basically, it's a criminal monarchy. And so it's not really controlled by the previous planet I talked about, which is Kalimar. It has its own government, and this government is criminal in a sense. And next planet is called Skagora. Skagora has 1 moon as well, and this is sort of a forest planet, very similar to, I guess, Endor that we get to see in episode 6 of Star Wars. But on the surface, specifically in the atmosphere, there's actually these city ships that float around the atmosphere, and basically that's where most of the population of Skagora lives. They live in these city ships because it's a little bit too uncomfortable to live on the surface. And the surface is basically all covered in forests, swamps, very large apex trees, and a lot of different wetlands. So basically, it's a planet that species like Wookiees might appreciate, but for humans, it's a little bit difficult to survive there. Now, all of these planets I've just talked about, at least most of them, are actually in the habitable zone, which is why they have really nice climates. So everything from Tython to Skagora, these 4 planets are actually, they have temperate climates, and they have really good atmosphere, really good temperature. So it's very easy to settle and live on them. But the planets closer to Tythus are obviously too hot, and the planets further away from it are obviously too cold. So let's explore the last 3 planets, and the next 2 are actually called the giants, and these 2 giants are obviously 2 gas giants. Now, first one is called Aubrey. This is what Aubrey looks like, and Aubrey has 3 moons, so it's actually a little bit smaller than any of the gas giants that we have in our solar system. It's probably on the smaller side. So here its mass is only about 8 times mass of Earth, and Aubrey doesn't really have anything special about it, except for there's 1 moon that's known in the Star Wars universe, and it's a volcanic moon called Zeris. It does appear in one of the comic books. Although I don't remember what happens on it, and I'm not going to spoil it for you anyway. Next we have Mor, or is it Maur? Mor. It's an angry-looking, angry-sounding gas giant. It's a little bit bigger than Aubrey, and this here has a mass of almost 10 Earths, and it has 7 different moons around it. And all of these moons on both of these gas giants are actually established colonies where a lot of different materials are actually mined, and a lot of the material is obviously gas because this is also a gas giant. But the idea here is that every object in the solar system is actually inhabited by some kind of a species, although altogether they're known as Tythons. And it actually represents many different races. It's not just humans, it's actually many races that came here originally when the original Jedi Order settled on Tython. And the last planet here is simply known as Furies Gate, and this is the outermost planet in the Tython system. Basically a barren world. It's only about 1/3 size of Tython, so it's about 24 times the size of the moon. And it's one of the few planets that is unsettled, but it does have a space station in orbit around this planet. So people do come on the surface, but basically most people live on a station that sort of orbits around this planet, and we can try to maybe represent this by putting something in orbit around this. Let's just put a random asteroid and name it Orbital Station, and there we go. So this is the orbital station where most of the population of this particular planet lives. And this somewhat cold red world is also actually a scientific research station where a lot of different research in this particular system is being done. So essentially, this is the 11 planets from this particular system, a really important system in the Star Wars universe, but a system that we don't really get to hear about until very recently. I believe the first time people actually got to read about this system and its planets is when Star Wars The Old Republic, the video game, came out, and it did describe many of these planets in a lot of detail. But many of these planets are mentioned in the extended universe, and many of these planets are also talked about in different comic books based on the Star Wars universe. And let's talk a little bit about Tython and its history using this game right here, which is Star Wars: The Old Republic. So Tython is the planet where originally the so-called Great Pyramids known as Thoyor landed, bringing a bunch of pilgrims to this particular planet. And here what Thoyor were, they were essentially like flying temples where the original Jedi Order was actually living and also training a lot of its disciples. And when these pyramids landed on Tython, they actually brought with them a lot of different species from across the galaxy, because a lot of different species were force sensitive and they were training on these pyramids. And so this Jedi Order actually was a little bit different from Jedi Order. What the Jedi believed in was the balance of the Force. They actually believed in the balance between the light and the dark Force, and they liked this planet for two reasons. One is that because its moons were kind of light and dark, and Ashla and Bogan are these two moons that represented the light and the dark side of the Force, but also because Tython was so strong in the Force. And like I mentioned before, anyone who was not Force sensitive could not survive on this planet. And what happened when one of the Jedi disciples became too light or too dark, they would actually have to go to one of those moons and use them for kind of meditation purposes. So for example, if you suddenly became too dark, you would have to go to Bogan and think about what you've done and look at Ashla, the bright moon, and try to get rebalanced in the Force. But interestingly, this planet was also very sensitive to the Force from really powerful beings. So even though this planet did achieve balance of the Force at some point, whenever someone really powerful in one side of the Force arrived to this planet, it would actually throw the entire planet into chaos. And because the planet itself was so sensitive to the Force, it would actually cause a lot of things like earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and basically all kinds of devastating effects that the planet would produce because of the disturbance in the Force. So for example, if one day Darth Vader decided to visit this particular planet, it would most likely cause ridiculously strong force storms and ground quakes, earthquakes, and basically devastate the surface of this planet. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is the timeline here. So the original pyramid arrival was 36,000 years before Luke Skywalker and before the Battle of Endor. And so this is actually a really long time ago, even before the Old Republic games. But something like 10,000 years after their arrival, there was a really evil sort of species called Rakata that we get to experience in the Old Republic games that do arrive to this planet and essentially throw its balance into chaos. And here we have a lot of battles, a lot of wars that start, and essentially this was the end of Jedi Order and the birth of the Jedi Order, because following the so-called Force Wars, where the light side and the dark side of the Jedi Order basically faced off against each other, and the light side actually won this battle. So the light side realized that it's all about the light force, not the dark force, and they actually decided to form this order called Jedi Order, which is how the Jedi Order was born. And this was approximately 25,700 years before the war between the Galactic Empire and the Rebellion that we get to see in the movies. And so the original Jedi Temple and the original Jedi groups were all located on this particular planet. But following a few more conflicts and wars, they actually did move their temple to a new planet called Ossus, and then they moved to Coruscant, and basically this is where the Jedi Order became the Jedis that we know today, and the old Jedi Order was essentially dismantled and turned into Sith and the Jedi. But interestingly, you actually get to see some of the remnants of this old world. If you play the Star Wars: The Old Republic here, some of the enemies are actually called Flesh Raiders, and these are sort of the mutated, evolved versions of the Rakata that caused the original Force Wars that basically led to the fall of the Jedi Order and the birth of Jedi and the Sith. So a lot of the old remnants, a lot of the old ruins that you get to visit here are all sort of historical representations of this old world that used to be here. But like I mentioned before, at the present time, in the episode 7, The Force Awakens, and all the previous episodes, this planet is no longer really used that much. It's been abandoned by the Jedi, it's been abandoned by many different other species, mostly because of the constant conflicts that essentially caused the Force on this planet to become really unstable and very dangerous for anyone anyone who steps on the surface. And so essentially this is Tython and Tython system in a nutshell. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, check out some of the other Star Wars related videos I've been posting using Universe Sandbox 2. You can also find a variety of other space videos on my channel, so subscribe if you enjoy these types of videos. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, game you later guys, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.